Welcome to the deep dive. We often talk about charismatic leaders, how they inspire innovation. But what if that charisma has, well, a darker side?
hmm
Today we're digging into exactly that. It's based on a really interesting recent paper by Arviel Simmons called Charismatic Extraction, a framework for analyzing exploitative leadership in innovation contexts.
Right. It's a fascinating concept.
So our mission here is to unpack this idea of charismatic extraction. What is it? How can you spot it? And why does it really matter in the workplace? We want to give you that framework.
Exactly, because we do tend to celebrate charisma, don't we? See it as purely positive for driving new ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this deep dive, drawing on Simmons' work, it shows how that same charm, that influence, can actually be used to, well, basically take over someone else's innovative work. It's about understanding that dynamic.
Okay, charismatic extraction. It almost sounds a bit, like you said, maybe corporate theft, but with a smile. So how does Simmons actually define it? What does it look like?
Well, the core definition Simmons uses is about leaders leveraging their charm and influence to essentially gain control over and then get credit for innovations that were actually developed by others, team members, colleagues.
Right.
And it's usually not one big dramatic act. It's more a collection of subtler behaviors, like a leader might hear an idea
Yeah.
and then sort of weave it into their own project, their own narrative, maybe presenting it as part of their bigger vision, but crucially, without really crediting the original source.
Right. So like maybe I mentioned a new feature idea in a meeting. Then a few weeks down the line, my boss presents their big plan upper management, and there's my feature presented as their key innovation. No mention of me.
That's a perfect example, a real classic.
Right.
But it can be even more subtle than that sometimes.
Oh, so?
Simmons also talks about things like strategically reassigning work, maybe not obviously to sideline someone, but the effect is that the original innovator's contribution gets diluted, less visible. Or sometimes it's more direct, the leader just claims partial credit, or even full credit. And another tactic, controlling resources.
Controlling resources.
Yeah.
Like budget.
Right.
Or platforms.
Exactly. Controlling access to the budget or the presentation platforms or key meetings. Basically gatekeeping, so the original innovator can't fully develop or showcase their own work independently.
Wow. It sounds less like a smash and grab and more like a slow creep, a gradual takeover.
That's a great way to put it.
It must be incredibly hard for the person whose idea it was to even notice it fully happening until it's kind of done.
Precisely. Simmons really emphasizes this. It's usually not some big, overt fight for control. It's often these small steps, maybe even things that seem reasonable or well-intentioned on the surface, but add them all up, and over time, the innovator gets pushed aside, disconnected from their work, and the leader is the one holding the spotlight. That gradual nature makes it super tricky to see clearly, let alone push back against.
Okay, so we get what it is now. But how does a leader actually do this? What are the mechanisms Simmons points to in the paper? How do they pull it off?
Right, the how. Well, one really interesting mechanism Simmons highlights is, maybe counterintuitively, the use of public praise.
Public praise. How does that work for extraction?
Well, a charismatic leader might really lavish praise on someone for an initial idea, in a team meeting or an email. Great thinking, that sort of thing. It creates this public image of being appreciative, supportive.
Okay, I see. So it's not about ignoring them. It's almost the opposite. Give them some recognition, but maybe it's performative.
Yeah.
Or used strategically.
Exactly. Performative is a good word. Or misdirection, maybe. That public praise makes it really hard for the innovator to complain later when the leader starts taking more control or credit.
Ah, because they'd look ungrateful. Or like they're rocking the boat after being praised.
Precisely. It manages perceptions very effectively. Then there's manipulation. Charismatic people often have high emotional intelligence, right? They're good at reading people. And Simmons suggests they can use this understanding to, well, manipulate, maybe through flattery or by controlling the flow of information, telling people only certain things, or appealing to loyalty. We're a team. This is for the greater good. Persuading people to give up control or accept a smaller role without really questioning it.
So using those people skills, which we normally see as a huge positive, but potentially for negative ends, got a weaponizing charm.
That's a really good way to phrase it, actually. weaponizing charm. And the final big mechanism is perhaps, obviously, the power imbalance.
Hierarchy.
Yeah, the basic organizational structure. Leaders just have more power. They can use that authority, often without even saying anything explicit, to legitimize them taking over ideas.
Right.
So if you're a subordinate, challenging your boss about who really came up with something, that's risky. You're questioning the hierarchy itself. It's tough.
Yeah, those mechanisms together paint a pretty clear and frankly kind of uncomfortable picture. It's not just accidental oversight. There's potentially a real strategic element.
That's exactly what the charismatic extraction framework tries to capture. The intentional, even if subtle, use of charisma and influence to make this appropriation happen.
And the paper gets into why this is actually a problem, obviously. What are the main ethical issues Simmons flags?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, it's exploitation, isn't it?
Right.
At its core, the leader is unfairly benefiting from someone else's work, their creativity, their effort, using those contributions for their own gain, or even the organization's gain, but without giving fair recognition or reward back.
It's definitely not just a minor slip-up then. It's hitting at fundamental fairness. And you have to think about morale, right?
Yeah.
If people feel their best ideas just get absorbed upwards.
Which leads straight into the second big ethical point. Injustice.
Okay.
When people who innovate don't get the credit, don't get the rewards, it creates this deep sense of unfairness. And that's incredibly demotivating.
Yeah, I can see that.
Why would you keep putting in that extra discretionary effort, that creative spark, if you feel like it won't be properly acknowledged? It dampens future innovation.
You're essentially discouraging the very behavior you claim to want, stifling innovation at the source.
Exactly. And the third key ethical issue is the damage to trust.
Yeah, big one.
If this kind of behavior is happening, or even just perceived to be happening, it absolutely shreds trust within a team or across an organization. People won't share early stage ideas. They won't collaborate openly if they're afraid their contributions will just be co-opted.
Right.
And that breakdown of trust, it's corrosive. It hurts teamwork, collaboration, and ultimately the long-term innovation capacity of the whole group.
Okay, to make this really concrete, I know the paper gives some specific examples. Can you maybe walk us through one or two just to see how it plays out?
Sure. Simmons offers a few clear illustrations. Take a typical corporate setting. You've got a junior team member, maybe in a meeting, they propose a really smart, novel solution to a problem the team's been stuck on. The manager is right there, seems really enthusiastic, praises the idea publicly in the meeting. Great thinking, Sarah. You know?
Sounds good so far.
Right. But then when that manager presents the project update to their bosses, to senior leadership, suddenly that junior member's idea is just seamlessly woven into the manager's own strategic narrative. Presented as if it was the manager's insight all along. No specific mention of Sarah.
Oof. Yeah, I feel like that's a scenario that probably resonates with a lot of people. You get the initial nod, maybe,
Yeah.
but when it counts for visibility, for advancement, the credit stays higher up.
Exactly. Or think about a startup. Maybe you have a really charismatic founder.
Yeah.
They're always talking up a key developer in public blogs, interviews, company meetings. Our tech guru, couldn't do it without them, builds this image of collaboration.
Right. Makes the company look good, makes the founder look good.
Precisely. But behind the scenes, when the really critical strategic decisions about the product are being made, that founder starts subtly, or maybe not so subtly, sidelining the developer's input, reducing their actual control over the very technology they were instrumental in creating. So the public story and the internal reality diverge.
Wow. So the praise is there, but the power, the influence over the actual work gets pulled away. It really makes you wonder how often these subtle power shifts happen without people fully realizing or feeling they can challenge it.
That's exactly the dynamic Simmons is trying to highlight. Now, the good news here is that the paper doesn't just diagnose the problem, it also talks about solutions, strategies for organizations.
Okay, good. Because just identifying it isn't enough. What can actually be done to sort of prevent this charismatic extraction, to make things fair?
Well, one really fundamental step is putting clear attribution policies in place, really robust ones.
What does that look like?
It means having explicit guidelines, formal processes maybe, for documenting who contributes what, right from the initial idea through to the final product or presentation.
So like formal disclosures or clear rules for crediting people in reports.
Yeah, things like that. Maybe internal tracking systems for ideas, making sure credit isn't just an afterthought or left up to the manager's discretion. Bake it into the system.
Makes sense. Build it into the process. What else?
Transparency. Fostering a culture where it's normal to talk openly about contributions.
How so?
Clear communication about who's doing what on a project, how decisions get made, why they get made, regular updates, maybe clearly defined roles. When things are out in the open, it's much harder for that subtle appropriation to happen unseen.
Right. Sunlight being the best disinfectant sort of thing. Less room for things to happen in the shadows.
Exactly. And another key strategy is empowering the innovators themselves more directly.
Giving them more agency.
Yes. Maybe creating platforms or programs where individuals can actually present and develop their ideas more independently. Think internal innovation labs, pitch sessions, things that reduce their dependence on having to go through a single charismatic leader to get their idea heard or resourced.
So giving them their own pathways to visibility and resources, bypassing potential gatekeepers. That sounds like it could really change the dynamics.
It absolutely could foster a much healthier ecosystem. And then finally, Simmons argues organizations really need to monitor leadership practices actively.
Meaning, like performance reviews for leaders.
Yeah, incorporating feedback on these specific issues. Are leaders being fair with recognition? Are they crediting their teams properly? Using things like 360-degree feedback can help surface patterns.
Okay.
And then crucially, being willing to actually address those patterns if they suggest extraction might be happening. It's about accountability for ethical leadership, not just results.
So building in those checks and balances. Making sure leaders are accountable for how they lead, not just what they achieve.
Exactly. So just to sort of wrap up the main points, charisma, we see it as a good thing in leaders. Often it is. But this framework, charismatic extraction, it gives us a lens to see a potential dark side.
Right. That charm and influence can be misused, intentionally or not, to unfairly take credit for the work of others.
And that has real ethical costs, exploitation, injustice, that erosion of trust we talked about.
But it's not inevitable. By understanding how it works, the praise, the manipulation, the power plays, and by putting measures in place, like those clear attribution policies, promoting transparency, empowering people directly, and keeping an eye on leadership behavior, organizations can fight back against it.
They can. They can work towards creating an environment where innovation is genuinely encouraged and ethically recognized, where charisma is used to uplift everyone, not just the person at the top.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it? While charisma itself isn't bad, we need to be aware how it can be deployed. So maybe a final thought for you listening. Reflect on your own experiences. How are contributions acknowledged or maybe overlooked where you work? Does this framework of charismatic extraction maybe shed some light on any dynamics you've observed?
It really pushes us to think about what effective and ethical leadership looks like beyond just the surface level charm and vision. It's about fairness, too.